Well, for anyone after straight answers, it was a pretty frustrating day watching those Senate hearings. Assistant Treasurer Josh Frydenberg joins us now from Canberra. Thanks for being there.
Nice to be with you, Tony.
Now, you're in a bit of trouble, aren't you, if those multinationals are as good at dodging tax as they are at dodging questions?
Well, certainly there is a problem with ensuring that these multinationals pay their appropriate levels of tax. As our discussion paper recently put out by the Treasurer points out, our traditional revenue sources are being eaten into by the digitalisation of the global economy, global supply chains, profit shifting and transfer pricing. It's not uncommon, Tony, to have investors in a company, consumers in a company, the manufacturers of the product and also the marketers of the product being situated in 4 different countries, and that is creating real challenges for us.
Yes, as we saw there in those clips, Apple's representative Tony King was asked how much of the $6 billion spent by Australian consumers buying Apple products goes overseas. Now, he never answered that question. Do you know the answer? A straight question for you. Well,
I'm sure the tax office knows the answer. I mean, this is an issue that...
Why are we sure the tax office knows the answer? Is this because you've managed recently to put tax investigators in to look at the books of these companies?
Well, we've done a number of measures, Tony. Certainly that is one of them. We've increased the resourcing of the international division of the Australian Tax Office, so now it's larger than it was when Labor was in government. We've also changed what is called the thin capitalisation rules to ensure that excessive debt deductions do not take place. And we're also, importantly, working through the G20 and the OECD process, which is on what is called a 15-point base erosion profit shifting program designed to increase information sharing between countries so that we can more appropriately tax these multinationals.
Right. Step number 1 is to figure out how much Australians are spending in these companies, how much revenue is being raised in this country and where it's going. So did you have ATO people put into every one of these big companies? It's been giving evidence today.
Well, without going into the names of specific companies, Chris Jordan has said publicly that there have been 200 reviews of major companies, many of which are multinationals. There's been intensive audits of a number of companies that are involved in the digital space, because this is a real challenge for us. I mean,
is there any reason why we can't name the companies? I mean, it's been made public that Google is one of them. I mean, can't we name the rest of them that the ATO has been, whose books the ATO have been looking at?
Well, I'm not sure what it actually achieves for the ATO to reveal the details of the specific companies in question. The point is the ATO are the proper people and investigators to do this work. It's been a compact in our tax system for decades between the tax investigators and also the taxpayers that information is provided in confidence, and I think that ensures the integrity of our system.
All right. Well, as I said, it's been publicly noted that Google is one of the companies where ATO investigators have been going through the books. Miley Carnegie from Google refused to give any figures on the amount of revenue going from Australia and ending up in Singapore. But to the ATO, you obviously know that figure. So is there a kind of target figure for the kind of tax they should be paying in Australia but are actually paying in Singapore, and in fact funding schools and research and roads and whatever in Singapore rather than Australia? Australian dollars going over there.
Well, this is a real challenge. One of the issues in relation to a company like Google or a company like Netflix is that they are supplying services which are called intangibles into Australia from offshore. So they actually don't pay the GST, and then if we were able to get that information about the GST that is paid, we could get a better understanding of their total revenue. That's one of the issues, Tony, that the OECD and the G20 are looking at. But I want to point out this is not an issue that just Australia is dealing with. When it comes to Google, they, in the United Kingdom, had around $18 billion worth of revenue over a 5-year period, but only paid $16 million worth of tax.
Yeah,
now,
I know. These figures are remarkable, and the more people in the public get to know the figures, the angrier they are. So let me just give you one little test here. Microsoft's Bill Sample, who was actually, he's an American, so for some reason he's a little more forthcoming when he was questioned. He said they take $2 billion in revenue from Australia. It all goes to Singapore. So a little sum for you. If that money was actually taxed in Australia, how much would actually go to the Treasury, the Australian Treasury, of $2 billion?
Well, as you know, we have a 30% company tax rate here in Australia, but there are also a number of tax deductions, whether it's for, for rent or for interest on borrowings and the like. So it's hard to give you an exact number, but certainly much more than has been indicated today would end up in Australia.
I guess we're looking at the hundreds of millions of dollars minimum, aren't we? So probably over $500 million.
Well, I think we're talking about billions of dollars here that is being lost to the Australian taxpayer by various tax measures that are taken by multinationals. And one of the well-known publicised issues is called the Singapore Sling, where multinationals are setting up marketing hubs in Singapore where they have a lower company tax rate. It's 17% in Singapore, and they are doing a lot of their profit shifting that way. Okay. This is an issue we need to look at. Now,
Microsoft's founder Bill Gates, this is 2 years ago, made a very simple point. He said it's all about the laws. If people want taxes at certain levels, great, we'll set them at those levels and the companies will be glad to comply. I don't know how glad they'd be, but are you looking at new laws in Australia to make them comply, to pay a fair share of tax, these multinationals?
Well, certainly we are running a simultaneous process. We're looking at what laws we can introduce unilaterally, and we are in discussions with the United Kingdom because they've just introduced a Google tax, which is for profits that are diverted offshore. It's a 25% tax that's imposed in the United Kingdom.
Well, in fact, in that tax, it's a kind of penalty because the company tax is 20% there.
Correct.
And if you divert your tax or your revenue out to another country, your profits out to another country, they charge you 25% on those profits. So
correct.
They get a penalty. So are you thinking along those lines, a penalty?
Well,
because that would make it in Australia, well, at least 35% on diverted profits.
Well, I know the Treasurer, Joe Hockey, is in discussions with his counterpart, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, George Osborne, in the United Kingdom on this very issue. We're also working through the OECD and the G20 process. In fact, we've taken a lead there. Chris Jordan, the Tax Commissioner, has been the Vice Chairman of the OECD Forum on Tax Administration, and we made a big point of dealing with this issue when we were President of the G20 last year. Look, the best outcome for countries like Australia is to get global cooperation, because that way we can share information about companies that are operating in here, but in return get from other jurisdictions information about those companies.
That's very important, but of course new laws, as Bill Gates said, are also important. We've seen what the British are doing, you're looking at it. Are we going to see something like that as soon as the next budget?
Well, I wouldn't want to be preempting any budget announcements, whether they were in relation to on the revenue or the spending side tonight, other than to say we are very seized of this issue.
Well, but hypothetically, if you were to introduce a diverted profits tax, a Google tax, in the next budget, could you automatically start raising billions of dollars from these multinationals who don't pay tax in Australia?
Good try, Tony. I'm not going to go down that path.
Well, you've already said that there's billions of dollars out there unraised. So if you brought in a tax that could raise it, could you theoretically start raising money, or would there be legal challenges that would stop you from doing it?
Well, there are legal questions to deal with various treaties that are in place between Australia and other countries. That's why the OECD G20 route is the best one to go down, because that would lead to a united position on these related issues.
Okay, there's already been an outcry from some of the targeted companies in Britain. We've seen overnight Kellogg's say it's going to affect their profits, and I guess one of the big questions here is whether these companies are so wedded, or their business model is so wedded to paying no tax or very little tax, if you actually tax them somewhere, whether they'll all collapse.
Well, I don't know if they'll all collapse. Certainly if we try to name and shame them publicly, as the Labor Party is trying to do in a desperate grab for a headline,
you need the Australian Labor Party in the Senate to help you vote this through, don't you?
Sure, but I mean...
You really want to go down that path?
No, Sam Dastyari is a stuntman. He's turning into the Evel Knievel of Australian politics. I mean, he knows very well that Chris Bowen, Wayne Swan, Bill Shorten have all said protecting the confidentiality of companies is vital. Now, we will introduce the right laws, but we've got to do it in a way that is considered, that is measured, and that is done in conjunction with our international counterparts.
Josh Frydenberg, we'll have to work out which circus character we can liken you to when you come back on. It won't be Evel Knievel, you've obviously taken that one. But we thank you very much for coming on tonight.
Nice to be with you, Tony.